Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this live stream event. My name is Alexia, and I am one of the project and event manager of the Microsoft Reactor. We will be sharing session resources with you in the chat, but before we begin, I'd like to quickly review two items with you, our code of conduct and event guidelines. First, please take a moment to review our code of conduct. Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. And secondly, our event guidelines. This session is being recorded and will be available on demand through the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. I will be sharing the link in the chat for our channel. And if you've not been on a live stream through YouTube before, please note that you must create an account on YouTube in order to access and interact in the chat. You can set that up now. And if you're unable to use the chat but have questions, feel free to reach out to us through social media or on Meetup. Which brings us to today's session. I'm going to bring in our host for today. Hello.
Hi, Alexia. Thanks for having us today.
Thank you for joining us.
And we're so excited to go for Ask the Expert session and answer all of the questions on our live session. And we have amazing experts joining us today. So let's get started. Awesome. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. Don't forget that this session is live. As Alexia mentioned, you can ask all of your questions in the chat window, and we will try to cover all of them throughout this session. And before we jump into Ask the Experts part, I just want to introduce you. We have a really short agenda. We will first introduce ourselves as a team and who are these experts, and then I will just quickly walk you through what is the task of the week and how we're going to close out 30 days of Microsoft Graph Challenge. If you're new and if this is your first session in the throughout 30 days of Microsoft Graph, don't worry, I will give a brief intro what is 30 days of Microsoft Graph, and then we will jump into what we are doing throughout the 30 days of Graph Challenge. And then we will answer all your questions and then wrap up the session. And obviously, we don't want to keep you all busy at the end of Friday. So we will just try to keep the session in the box of 1 hour. All right, so let's jump into the intros. My name is Ayça Baş. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. I'm based in Dubai, and I love building solutions across Azure, Power Platform, and Microsoft 365 to help customers, developers, and if you're interested in learning more about technologies on Microsoft Cloud and the solutions we build using Microsoft Cloud services, you can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or I also have an account on GitHub, and you can reach out all of the solutions I built. I share a lot of blog posts and content across those channels. I also want to say that I'm a proud Microsoft student ambassador alumni. I was in the program probably 10 years ago, and then program changed and evolved a lot throughout the years. And we also have really talented student ambassadors and MVPs joining us today to help us in the chat and also on the live session to answer all of your questions. Okay, so let's have everyone on screen. We have Gary with us too. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Ayça. Thanks for having me here today. It's great to join in with the 30 days of Graph. So really excited to be here. So yeah, just introduce myself to everyone. So I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. Unfortunately, I'm not based in sunny Dubai like Ayça. I'm based in rainy England in the UK. And yeah, my background, I've been in this kind of area, Microsoft 365 area, coming from SharePoint for about the last decade. Before I joined Microsoft, I was a consultant, I was a developer, I was an architect working for Microsoft partners and working for different companies, building solutions on the platform, Microsoft 365 and Azure as well. I was a two-time Office development MVP as well before I joined Microsoft. And at the moment, I'm absolutely loving building solutions for Microsoft Teams, especially bots. Yeah, if you want to connect with me on Twitter or on LinkedIn, you'll find me sharing lots of things around bots and Microsoft Teams development at the moment. But I also do lots of other things as well. I'm interested in open source. I'm an open source maintainer for a community project, TLI for Microsoft 365, which uses the graph heavily to provide the features that it does. And yeah, so just really excited. So thanks again, Aisha.
Awesome. Thanks for joining, Gary. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions for you today to answer. And you're not the only ex-MEP. We also have an MEP today joining us. Let's have Ingo over and introduce himself. Hi, Ingo.
Hi, Aicha. Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me here as well. Yeah, my name is Ingo. I'm working for SAP. I'm based in Germany, so a little bit better of weather, but not as good as you have. Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm here part, or let's say like this. I'm coming actually from Exchange. Yeah, not like Gary from SharePoint. So I'm also a Microsoft certified master and also now an MVP for a few years. Yeah, so just again coming from Exchange, so we are always involved, and that's why I currently also working in my current role, helping our line of business application or some other customers getting more out of Microsoft Graph and M365, and not only M365 or Azure. So it's Graph. It's definitely the tool to go to, and also in my daily work as an admin. So if you want to join me, whatever, connect to me. You can find me on Twitter. I missed that here. You can also find me on GitHub. I also sharing some of my codes, just also for giving ideas, for others. And I'm happy also to learn from others. So bring up your question, and I'm hopefully happy to answer your question here.
Awesome.
No?
We all have really different profiles, so we're really excited to learn from each other too. And we have Aditi with us as well. Aditi is a student ambassador joining us today. Hi, Aditi. Would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Isa. Thank you for bringing me to this amazing session. And I am a computer science student, programming enthusiast, and an avid learner. I am presently a beta Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador. I am passionate to work on Microsoft technologies like Microsoft Graph and Azure. I actually want to use technology for social good and look forward to create a meaningful change through technology. And you all can connect with me on LinkedIn, or I'm also active on GitHub.
Awesome. Great intro. And unfortunately, we don't have a slide for Abdurrahman, but Abdurrahman is also joining us and helping both Aditi and Abdurrahman. They will be both helping us in the chat to answer all of your questions. Abdurrahman, would you like to also introduce yourself?
Thank you, Aisha, and hello, everyone. I am Abdurrahman Iyad from Egypt. I am a Gold Microsoft ambassador. It is a really honor today to be with you all, guys, and I hope you will learn new technologies. We are passionate as a student ambassadors. We are passionate towards technology, and we aim to change our communities to use technologies to best of our good on our technologies. And thank you. I hope you get the most of this session, and thank you for this amazing speakers.
Awesome. Thank you, Aditi and Abdurrahman, for your providing the support us in the chat. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions, so we will be looking forward to receiving them in the background from your side. Before we jump into answering your questions, I just want to do a really quick recap to introduce you what is the program, because there might be some of you joining this session and trying to understand what is this challenge about in the first place. 30 Days of Microsoft Graph Challenge is a self-paced learning program we built for you, and we are also doing these live sessions in each week. We are currently in week 4, but that doesn't mean that you can jumpstart and start learning about Microsoft Graph. In the week 1, we actually started with Microsoft Graph fundamentals and shared with you all the resources about Microsoft Graph to start from scratch. And in week 2, we learned how to use Graph in the scenarios. In week 3, we build scenarios from scratch, and you can find some of the workshops there. And in week 3 especially, we ask you to propose some of the projects that you may want to work. And we're in week 4 right now. Everyone is working on their own project at the moment, and they're asking their questions for us. And week 5, which will be next week, we will have one last session, and we will interview Microsoft Graph directors. And then on Wednesday, because it's the end of November, we will close out this challenge. We still have some time for you to enjoy the learning materials of the session or of the challenge. And also, if you know a little bit of Graph, maybe you can jumpstart building project from scratch. If you have any questions about the challenge, or if you're looking for like where can I find all these self-paced learn materials, you can just go to ak.ms/30 days of MS Graph, and then you will find all the curriculum materials there. You can start from learning with the learn materials. At least week 1 and week 2 will be all about Microsoft Learn paths. You can just complete those within a couple of days to understand the concept. And if you're already if you already know a little bit about Microsoft Graph, this part of the challenge will be all about building your own projects. If you're more interested in building your own project, you can just go to ak.ms/30 days of MS Graph/scenarios. That place will be the place you will propose your project scenario. And if you say that the graph is a bit complex, I can't build my own project idea, we have a really long list of solution scenario options for you. You can grab one from the list and let us know that this is the one you're working on. And we will know that, okay, you pick that scenario and you will be working on that scenario until the end of the challenge. And if you have any questions throughout your learning experience or your project, you can always go to this link, GitHub discussions. You see that there are already lots of people asking questions about the challenge, about Graph, and they've been trying to consume the self-paced learning materials and asking their questions when they get stuck throughout the project building process and so on. You can first off introduce yourself, and you can also leverage from the GitHub discussions to ask your questions. There are a lot of experts waiting your questions and answer, like myself, Gary, and Ingo. We are all there to answer all of your questions all the time. And if you're asking yourself, why should I join this challenge? And is there any prizes? Of course, what is a challenge without prizes, right? We have some prizes for you, obviously. If you complete the learn materials of week 1 and week 2, and if you see the completion of learn paths, we will actually give a chance to top 10 Cloud Skills Challenge winners to record YouTube shorts together with us in the Microsoft 365 Developer YouTube channel. And we will promote those videos across Microsoft official social channels. So if you complete the learn materials of week 1 and week 2, you will be eligible to win the top 10 Cloud Skills Challenge winner prizes. If you submit your project at the end of next week, then if your project gets picked as top 3, you will get a mentorship opportunity from advocacy leadership, and as well as Microsoft Graph product group leadership to introduce yourself a little bit, and also get the 101 mentorship session with all those leaders. And also another prize we are giving to top 4 capstone project winners we will be actually interviewing your project and yourself in Show and Tell series in Microsoft 365 Developer YouTube channel. So you will be explaining your project, and then we will get to know you a little better, and we will also promote those videos across Microsoft official channels. So if you're interested learning more, if you're already in the challenge and already learned a lot about Microsoft Graph, bring it in. Ask your questions in the chat. This session is live, and Ingo, Gary, and myself, we are all here to answer your questions. I feel like I talked a lot about the challenge, but if someone is new, they will be asking like, what is graph in the first place? So Ingo, would you like to explain us really briefly what is graph in general?
Well, how do you phrase it, or where should I start actually? Graph actually for me as an admin as well, but also for our developers actually, it's an endpoint where I can gather data, and either I can consume the data from multiple workloads actually. It's all around M365. It's all around, let's say, like this, like your mail, your calendar. It is all about your teams there. It is all about your account maybe. Yeah. You can get from one endpoint, from multiple workloads actually, data, and consume them easily. And it's fast and reliable. It's REST, OData based.
Awesome. And Gary, do you have any other points to add?
No, I mean, you've covered it quite well there, Ingo. I think for me, it's the kind of the one API to rule them all, really. It's kind of like we want just, as developers, we want an easy life, right? We've got enough things that we need to worry about. So getting data out of Microsoft 365 to go to one endpoint and be able to, like say, pull in information from email and from tasks and from SharePoint with files, and be able to do that easily. Just, define the permissions that we want in our applications, get a token, and then go get that information through a a simple REST API interface. It just makes everything nice and simple, easy to access, so that we can think about what do we want to do with our applications rather than, oh, how do I get at the data? It's like the data is there. We go through the graph. Now what do we do with it? Now that we've got that, how do we incorporate that information into our solutions so that we can improve our productivity, if you like, or to create something entirely new. So yeah, just to add on that.
Exactly. And more and more, I feel like after especially COVID, we are moving to hybrid workspace more than ever. So I think the data behind Microsoft 365 became much more important than it used to be. And even for productivity, collaboration, having all the data in one single place and combining that with apps, or maybe automating processes behind the scenes, like Ingo mentioned that he is admin, instead of doing everything manually. Let's say that 1,000 people should be added in the company Active Directory. It's obviously impossible to do that manually. I mean, you can do that, but no one wants to do it, right? Yeah, exactly. So we definitely need an API to do all these actions automatically as developers, as admins. So Microsoft Graph is there for us to access the data behind Microsoft 365 Cloud. And we can get all sort of data, like examples Gary and Ingo gave already, like To-Do, Outlook, Calendar, or SharePoint, Microsoft Teams as well. We can access the data and use data in our custom apps, or we can use data to automate processes instead of doing all these processes manually. And these stuff are really critical if you are working in a company that actually uses Microsoft 365 ecosystem, because it's becoming as one core priority when it comes to using this space as hybrid workspace. And I mean, we are full-time working from home right now, and Microsoft Teams is only digital workplace for us, and everything being there, like an app or any data we need being there, is actually really critical. And you can build your own apps by using Graph, by using data behind Microsoft 365. I'm sure we can come up with lots of scenarios, but there are some basic scenarios we can give you as an example. Like, Gary, do you have any projects like you worked in the past? I know that you have consultancy background too, so I'm sure you've worked in a lot of customer projects that includes Microsoft Graph.
Yeah, so one good example, and just kind of my background as well. So my kind of interactions with the graph from a consultancy point of view was really around automation and automation of processes, rather than I'm building a web application and pulling in data that way. It was more along the lines of how do we do things at scale. So to give you a scenario, I was working for a Microsoft partner, and we were working for a university, and they had just moved to Teams, and they were getting ready for their new semester, and they wanted to utilize Teams as part of that. So they then thought, okay, great, wouldn't it be great if we had Teams for the individual group of learners, for the lecturers, for the students, to have a common area to share chats and files. And obviously, there's quite a lot of activities that are going to happen in a semester. So this, was hundreds, thousands of Microsoft Teams that we were needing to create, stand up, configure, but also we needed to understand the information of, well, who are the lecturers that need to go in the individual teams? Who are the students that need to go in them as well? So we helped this university basically to read a database where they had all of this information for all the scheduling for their upcoming semester. So we would read that information from the database. We'd understand who are the lecturers. They're going to be the owners of the team, and then go through a provisioning process to create a Microsoft 365 group, set some configuration settings on the group, then make that into a Microsoft team. So extending the group with the Teams capability, adding the students in as members, but then also then going that step further of, okay, do we need to put any files in there so that there's files ready for the lecturers to, have some guidance that they could follow when they've been given this team as well, and just kind of reduce that need for manual intervention, so that 90% of the work was done at scale. And we used the graph to do that, and it made it really simple because we just had one API to call. We were yes, connecting to an external database, but then just reusing that information and passing that through into Graph, which made that really easy. And to your point about this could have been done manually, right? We could have spent the time, but sometimes, one, do we want to do that? But two, sometimes time is against you as well. And by going through the graph and creating these automations, that's then there as a repeatable process. So for the next semester, you already have a process in place. You can then go, oh, actually, what are the extra things that we want to add in there? Has there been anything added to the graph that we can now take advantage of? The graph is not a static thing. It's changing all the time. There's new capabilities being added as well, with new workloads, new features. It might be that for the next semester, they might want to add tasks and task management and bring Planner in there. It's, there's extra things that you can do. And, by using the graph to stand up these teams, that really helped with adoption as well of teams within this university, because people were able to use it. And then, as people are using the different services in Microsoft 365, you get ideas, based on just your general usage, and that's how you grow and become more productive and essentially do more as well. So that was a scenario that kind of really interested me from a scale point of view, and just to see the benefit of what that had after we implemented it for the learners and the lecturers. It's just helped them organize their work much easier than they had done before using Teams and Graph.
Yeah, I was working in a really similar project at the beginning of COVID when I was working in the field engineering at Microsoft Consultancy. It was actually a bit tragic that at the beginning of COVID, Ministry of Education in one country asked us to move the entire education system to Teams within 2 weeks. And we were, wow, like thousands of students and teachers and maybe millions. And how can we do that? Like, how can you assign users, like teachers and students, to teams and teams channels correctly without doing any mistake manually? It's impossible to do that for thousands of people. So you need some algorithm behind the scenes. You need APIs to automate that process. And you can't literally do that without Microsoft Graph. If you ever try to do this manually in person, I'm sure, I mean, I would definitely mess up, and I would definitely assign students or teachers to the wrong classes, I'm sure.
Yeah,
But
that's a great example, right? Of you you have the human in there, and there's going to be some mistakes, right? We're guaranteeing
yeah.
it's going to happen. One thing which I didn't mention was when we created the teams, we actually utilized the templating element of the graph as well. So way back when we did this, there wasn't the ability in Teams like there is now in the UI, where you would create a new team and it would say, do you want to create a team for like a project? And it would have a template there. That didn't exist, but it existed in the graph. So we were able to use that templating, get the templates set up, and then actually they were reused in the user interface when that new feature arrived. But we were able to again reduce the I guess the extra code that we needed to write by saying, well, here's our blueprint for our team as well. Here's the channels that we want, the apps that we want in there, and apply that to the team. So we didn't have to go to the individual API endpoints for how do I add a tab in a team. There was already something there behind the scenes that we could utilize. So yeah, in a lot of cases, there's further simplification behind the scenes in Graph that you don't necessarily see in the user interfaces that you would come across as a normal user of the platform. So that's one of the things that by using the Graph you get those advantages as well.
Yeah, and we were building that project by using Microsoft Graph PowerShell SDK because it is mainly really helpful when it comes to automating the processes behind the scenes. And I'm sure Ingo is working all the time with the PowerShell SDKs, right? Ingo, do you also work on such projects with Microsoft Graph in the admin perspective?
Yeah, definitely. But one thing I want to highlight, maybe also because why we want to use the graph, also for those developer, which because we just mentioned we get all the data from graph for mail, for SharePoint, Teams. There is one big change right now. I just want to highlight because all the projects might still have the setting and connect to the Outlook Office 365.com endpoint, and the mail team, they just again they highlighted it's going to be deprecated, so the rest calls that they won't work. So please move everything to graph right now. If you have projects, that's also something, or don't start project right now with the old legacy actually endpoint, move to graph. Yeah, now coming to your question, of course, we also a large company, specifically also like other larger companies working every day. Yeah, you can use the UI to maintain, to manage your user, the object teams, mailboxes and all stuff like this. Yeah, but definitely graph. Again, here it's an easier way to gather data, and if necessary to also to alter data, to modify them and set the settings there. And as Gary also outlined, if you have some projects like this, there is a batch of updates you have to run. Yeah, that means you have to create a lot of users. You have to create teams, and channels and stuff like this, and assign permission and like what you did, assign um, users, to group so that they are member of this team, actually. And of course, for automation, PowerShell, I definitely I started PowerShell a few years ago. I love it because you have the ability also to get all different kind of languages also there included. But yeah, with Azure Functions and other actually Azure workloads and functionalities and features, of course you can automate things quite easy. what I saw, what you can do is also is you can have a listener there and say, hey, if something was created on this SharePoint, or if a user was created, then start with the following task and do this and that. Yeah, depending on attributes of this user, you can do the automation there, and maybe just I don't know if this was already mentioned here. One of the things I see also a lot of developer always or at the beginning struggling with it is permissions there. I know there is two main permission actually. Also, when we're talking from OAuth perspective, which is the authorization protocol here, it's delegated there and application permission. Gary, how do you deal, or it's you have the also the issue or whatever the challenge to yeah, what is the difference between them? I mean, usually say delegated has always on behalf of a user, or there's always a user involved. And then it's most likely interactive. So there you have to act something. You sign in with your username, and then you have to do MFA or something else. Put in your username. Uh, yeah, depends on the setting and whatever. Then perform additional tasks. Application is always like a daemon or service, and this is things what you do for automation here, where
Yep.
you have to grant the permission, the proper permission, and grant consent for this application, so you can do pull the data or modify the data you want to, right?
Yeah, just on that point, yeah, authentication is the hardest part, right?
It's
It's the hardest part, but it's the thing that you need to get
yeah.
at the data. So it's something that every developer, every admin needs to kind of understand to access that data for obvious reasons. We need to do this securely and safely. So yeah, you mentioned about delegate and application. So delegate definitely kind of like on behalf of you as a user. So you generally see delegate permissions used in, say, web applications that you're signing in. So let's say you build an application using Microsoft Graph and you sign into that to see your tasks, your email. And to do that, the application is going to say, do you consent to using these permissions on your behalf? And they might look kind of scary, like, group.read.all or something like that, right? And it's kind of like, oh, I can read absolutely everything in the tenant. And it's like, no.
No.
We can read what you have access to and only what you've
Correct.
got access to, because it's you as an individual. And if you've got access to absolutely everything, then maybe you're using an account that's maybe got too much permissions, but it's not the application that's doing that. That's your account and the permissions that you've got set up. But that allows the application to only say, well, I only want a little bit of the, I want to be able to access the little bits of information that you have access to, not everything. So if it's just mail, we can just ask for mail. And, if we're not using files in our application, we're not going to then ask you for files and that information. On the flip side, the application permissions, you're right, is more for those kind of background processes. So, for example, the scenario that I talked about with provisioning Microsoft Teams in the background, that's where we'd use application permissions that then we can grant higher permissions to that application that's running in the background. But there's a different way of us being able to authenticate. We might authenticate through a certificate or a client secret, which is stored away and encrypted, which is much more difficult to compromise. But there isn't a user in the middle. It's running as the application identity. So, if we granted the application identity of group read.all, we would be able to read everything in the tenant using that permission, which is different. And in some scenarios, we need that. We need to have higher permissions. We need to be able to write things as well, and create objects, which require us to have those extra permissions. But those are the things that, when you're setting up an application registration, setting up your permissions, these are the choices that you're going to need to make, and kind of which is the most appropriate permissions for what I am trying to achieve, or what my application needs to what data my application needs from the graph to function correctly, and how those flows work. So yeah, it's difficult. Luckily, there's lots of documentation that you can consult. There's tons of videos as well, and like MVPs like yourself helping people kind of go through this this initial kind of understanding of how permissions work with the graph.
Yeah, the good
Yeah.
thing, at least I can say, definitely for Exchange, that means for a mailbox, you can definitely scope those permission there to only a subset of the mailboxes. That's really one thing. And for Teams, there's something similar what you can do, and similar also on SharePoint. You can do it at least per site, that you
Yep.
can scope it only for this. So it's not that someone who has access to this application, they can access everything within the tenant, which is not actually the size that, unless there is something yeah larger going on. And this is actually also one of the things I also want to mention about a scale. What I really love from Graph, and this is something like in the old let's say way of administrating, you can definitely define what you want to get back. So that means we can only the set of properties. We can define it, and this is when it comes to scale. This is it really makes a sense because you improve the response. Think about it. If you request data about a user object which has maybe 50 attributes on it, everything has to come back over the wire. Even if it's JSON and it's light, that's fine. It has to come back, yeah. But if it's the amount of data transferred over the wire, it's larger than if you just request, hey, I want to have only, let's say, the manager ID or just the ID of the object, or a specific attribute from this. You can define it, the graph brings it back. And this is also an improvement here in terms of speed and performance and the latency here.
Yeah. There is also one question in the chat
Yeah.
saying that Ramon is asking if we can get data from Compliance Center. I know that Microsoft Graph has an API for compliance and privacy. I'm not sure what kind of data exactly you're looking for. I think you already mentioned DLP reports from there to Power BI. I know that you can gather data from Compliance Center using Compliance and Privacy API, and you can build your dashboard in Power BI by either creating custom connector, or you can actually store the data coming from Graph in Azure Cloud Storages or somewhere else, and then export data on Power BI to show. Do you have Gary or Ingo, do you have any comments on the Compliance Center data you can access with Graph?
Yeah, I mean, I could say that. So there are endpoints in the graph for compliance. So this is the purview area. So there are endpoints in V1. But there's some more additional ones in the beta endpoints as well. But if you're going through V1, which are the production endpoints, they're not going to change. So they're a lot more stable. I think at the moment you can access subject write request data at the moment. There's more being added. So I do know that in the beta endpoints there are there's endpoints for managing labels as well. So this is definitely coming. Again, like I mentioned, Graph is a moving target, right? There's always things adding. So it's always good to have an eye on what's happening in the beta version, because those will become GA and head into V1, and it's good to understand how they work, test them out, and see what data comes back, and also feedback to ourselves. Microsoft are always interested in understanding if you got the information that you need before we go to GA as well. We can make changes at this point whilst you're testing and expand on those APIs before they go live. But yeah, I guess it's what types of data are you after? If you can expand on that. It is there, but yeah, I don't quite know how to answer your question specifically without the next level of detail, but definitely have a look. I think we can post a link into the chat, Aicha, to the docs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as Gary mentioned, I mean it's very limited at the moment, but the Pure View is also, yeah, it just not just went GA, but it is evolving, and it might take a little bit longer. But of course, as soon as the endpoint can get, you can get the data from the endpoint, yeah, you can then just also build it there and then import it into Power BI. Of course, what is it? That's also one of the things. It's light. It's just HTTP. It's just a REST request, and it's a JSON what you have to parse.
Exactly. And one more thing, I see that Ramon is following up with a question, how can I connect to you to point me to the right direction? Ramon, if you go to ak.ms/30 days of MS Graph, you will see GitHub discussions link there. You can post your question there and we can learn from you what sort of data you're looking for exactly and try to help you and guide you to the right products engineering team at Microsoft to learn more what's coming next after beta. And also Alexia from the Reactor team already posted our link. There's already a compliance API in beta in Microsoft Graph. If you check out the link, you can take a look and let us know more about what sort of data you're looking for. There is also another question coming from Andre from Colombia. And thanks, Andre, for bringing this up. Actually, we definitely want to know where you all joining from this session. So feel free to comment in the chat where you are joining this session from. We all mentioned we are joining from different parts of the world. So we want to get to know you a little better. And the question is more about a tip to distributed time to finish the challenge. And Andre, if you were interested in more about learning phase, you can actually complete week 1 and week 2 learn materials, which will be the fundamentals of Microsoft Graph. And also you will learn how to consume Graph in scenarios with JavaScript. And if you know a little bit about Graph, you can directly jump into week 3 and start building your own project. There's also project scenarios available. If you go to the landing page, which is ak.ms/30 days of MS Graph, you will find top Microsoft Graph scenarios there. You can pick one of the scenario and you can start building your own project by using Microsoft Graph. There is also another question about Sridevi. Is there any Learn module for using MS Graph in bot framework? In bot framework, I am not 100% sure if there is any Learn module available, but there is definitely available blog posts and tutorials. Maybe if you're specifically interested in using Graph in bot framework, Sridevi, if you connect us in the GitHub discussions, I can definitely share more blog posts and learning materials with you in the private in the GitHub discussions chat. And I also want to discuss this really quickly, that we've been talking about Microsoft Graph as a REST API, but we also provide Microsoft Graph SDKs and in different languages. In this challenge, we use JavaScript. There's also Go, PowerShell, which is a really popular one, .NET, and list goes on and on. I just want to ask, what is the difference between using Graph as a REST API versus using Graph SDKs in your project? What is the value proposition the SDKs bring in your project?
Well, let me phrase it like this: if you're not really into as a good start, also starting point for learning, an SDK is definitely the best way, because it already wraps it up. It is doing automation and authentication and stuff in already for you, and in a way that it works. So if you are already an advanced user, whatever, then you might not want to use SDK, because you know what you're doing actually, and you want to send, your HTTP request by, you want to build it by them yourself. What I always recommend is, when it comes to authentication, definitely use MSAL. That's one of the things, because it's too complex. Why just don't use this one? The only thing is, yeah, definitely. And if you can leverage the existing SDK and load them, that's the only thing what you have to be aware of. Yeah, SDKs, of course, they have also always an improvement in terms. Maybe there are some bugs, but in most cases, there is also some new features are available. So a new version is there. So that means you have to keep your project up to date with the right version. That's something what you have to maintain. If you don't want that, okay, but still, I'm for when it comes to authentication, use MSL. Yeah, as often as possible, or as the authentication broker, let's say like this, And if you really want to have only the HTTP request and build it by yourself, but you also have to handle it.
Yeah,
At scale also. That's also
it's
something. Yeah.
I agree. The SDKs are a lifesaver, definitely when it comes to authentication. And if you're new to developing apps with the graph, then it also brings you a lot of options to write the API and make the calls easily, rather than just, if you don't know anything about OData and how to filter the data, how to bring the order and sort and so on. I think SDKs are really helpful in that way. Gary, do you want to add something else?
Yeah, so I mean, the SDKs are great to, let's say, abstract away so that some of those kind of finer details, right? So the difference between, handcrafting a string that has the different URLs in there. You might be adding extra properties into the URL. You might be adding filter parameters, expands, all those kind of things. And that can get quite complex if you're, working in complex scenarios. And the SDKs can provide an abstraction over the top of that, so that you don't have to construct that full URL. You can just go through, a nice interface to construct your query and then execute that. Kind of in addition to that, another thing as well is that it helps with different scenarios. So let's say batching, for example. So rather than just sending one request to the graph, let's think, I want to get 3 pieces, 4 pieces, or maybe more bits of information. I can get them all at the same time, and I can be more efficient in doing that. So I can construct a batch request to do that. And that's not trivial to do, but the SDKs make it so much easier to create these batching queries to go and get that data from the graph and then return it as well. So that's another thing that the SDKs do definitely help with. One of the favorite things that I like, I'm JavaScript developer, TypeScript. You've got the Microsoft Graph types packages as well, where I can bring in the actual objects of the responses that I get back from the graph as well. So then I know, okay, I've got strongly typed objects in my TypeScript code that I can get data out of these objects much easier than kind of consulting the reference documentation, seeing which properties I've got. I've actually got that in my IDE when I'm coding away, which saves me tons of time. And that's the other thing, right? The SDK is saving you time to spend on other things. The drawback, like Ingo said, it's a dependency in your project, and you need to manage this like any other dependency. Make sure it's up to date, and just have that as part of your regular maintenance cycles to just make sure that you're running the latest version and you're taking advantage of all the latest capabilities as well. So yeah.
Exactly.
great.
And one of the probably top things SDK provided me so far is if you're in further in your project, and if you, let's say, past the beginning phase, and if you're handling with lots of data, um, when you call the REST APIs alone, it may require you to handle throttling issues or some other issues alone. But then if you're working in the projects, like we gave an example, like thousands of people needed to be assigned to write groups and write permissions and stuff, then SDKs provide you a lot of flexibility to handle all the throttling issues, all the problems when you are handling lots of data behind the scenes. So I think if you want to use Microsoft Graph in production or in end-to-end scenario, SDKs definitely bring a lot of value into the table. And definitely something to take a look is updating them regularly. But it's, I think, a thing for all the SDKs, right? Not just Microsoft Graph. You always need to make sure that the SDKs are up to date all the time.
Yeah, and most of the things actually what you just mentioned, also throttling, that's definitely one thing. And then think about also from your wherever you sit, you're sitting with your laptop somewhere else, you're connected maybe to your server is connected to the internet, and then you're calling Microsoft Graph. The internet connection can just interrupt it, or something happens. The graph, also the SDK, that definitely one huge advantage. It reconnects. It takes care of this at least, and then it's almost seamless. Those interruptions, then yeah, it's helpful. While when you're doing just the HTTP, you have to do it all manually. That's absolutely one thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the better to go with the SDK. Yes, unless you really want to know what you're doing and you know what you're doing. Yeah, that's
Definitely. I think just you were making a point earlier on, Ningo, about using the select parameters and basically getting data back from the graph that you need for that purpose. And I think it can kind of be a new concept for developers who are new to the graph and new to 365 of, well, I'm just getting my data, so I'll just send a request and I'll bring everything back. What impact does that have on me, right? Because I'm just calling a cloud service. They can handle that. But, in 365, especially the graph, we have this concept of throttling, of that, you have to be thinking about being efficient with your calls, right? So that is, yes, you're going to get responses quicker, but actually it's going to use less resources on the on the Microsoft side as well, which is then going to mean that you're not going to be as susceptible to throttling as much as just go get me all the data that you can give me. So those are the things that I think as you're new to developing against the graph APIs, those SDKs provide that ability that if you do get throttled, you have that retry mechanism. And that there might be a failure that happens in the background, and from your perspective in your application, that's been captured, and then we've retried again, and then we can retry after a certain period of time, which sometimes the graph tells us. It says retry in so many seconds to make your next request, and then we can have applications that don't fail as much due to that, because cloud services, they're always under different load, right? They're under
you
different
have your
load, your own
ISP
network.
in between.
Exactly. Yeah. We've got lots of moving pieces, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. My final question to you both. So we have lots of students, fresh graduates, career switchers, experienced developers who are interested in diving into more Microsoft 365 area, joining to the challenge, and maybe listening us today in this live session. I just want to ask you both, because I know that you've been also coming from outside of Microsoft company, that you work in the partner companies, big consultancy companies, and what is the value of adding Microsoft Graph into your skill set as a fresh graduate or career switcher, or in general, how can Microsoft Graph help you improve your career steps and maybe getting your next job in the sector? Do you want to add some points into that?
Well, yeah, definitely. As a developer, I also know from my teammates and also from my colleagues here. As a developer, Microsoft Graph, it's a huge ecosystem there, and is anyways that's also the way to go. And we will see that a lot of companies even moving here from on-prem to cloud. So the data will be there, and it's an ongoing development there of data, and there are more features there, and that's definitely something. If you're looking for a job, if you know how to query, how to handle actually or get data out of graph, and could be as a report, could be as an app, for daily work or something, just simple thing which helps the users actually. This helps also companies, and this helps you in your career. As an admin, it's the same. Also, if you we just had it also about the performance there. I also want just one of the things there is an merchant acquisition or an carve out. You can query all the data there as an admin, for instance, or a consultant, if you go in that direction there, and you can easily import them. And not easily, but most of the things there definitely can import it on at scale to a different tenant, for a different company. It makes life just easier.
Yeah, definitely. I think, having something like, being able to get data out of the Graph API as a student, it shows that you've understood a number of concepts which are transferable to, most web technologies and most cloud services. To be honest, it's, you have some code who's running on your machine or somewhere in the cloud, and you're able to securely authenticate with another service to get some data back. And that's HTTP, that's authentication, OAuth. You've got Azure AD in there as well, specific to Microsoft. The permissions that we talked about as well, so delegate versus application, and the different flows as well that you have available to you to get that data out. Like we mentioned, are you running a background service? Are you wanting to get data as a particular as a current user? That shows a wealth of understanding which will serve you well whether you go on to Microsoft 365 or you go on to do anything else. These are transferable skills. So yeah, definitely. If you can get that on your CV, it's always going to be a winner in my view.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary and Ingo, for joining us today and answering all of these amazing questions. It was definitely awesome to interview you throughout this Q&A session. I know that we can go along like this because we always have stories to talk about when it comes to Microsoft 365 and Graph. We have lots of examples. And specifically, thank you for giving us those great examples and maybe lighting some ideas and inspiring others who are just listening us today in this session. And I also want to thank Aditi and Abdurrahman, who were helping us behind the scenes for getting all the questions. Before we close out this session, I want to highlight that next week will be the last week of Microsoft Graph Challenge. And if you're interested in getting to know Microsoft Graph product group, we will have a session on Monday, and we will interview Kristen Womack. She is the developer experience lead in the Microsoft Graph product group organization. And we will learn a bit more about herself and getting to know how does Microsoft Graph product team work day-to-day basis, how are their hiring process, and who does what behind the scenes to make this brilliant product come to life. And finally, we will close out this challenge on Wednesday, November 30th, and we will announce all of the class skills challenge, and then we will give you a little bit more time to finish your projects until the end of the week, which is Friday, and then we will also announce the winners of the projects as well. And that's all from us for today. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, as always, you can always go to GitHub discussions and ask your questions. We will be there to answer all of your questions about the challenge, about Graph, and about your projects too. Thank you so much all for joining. Have a great weekend. See you in the
Thank
next
you.
session.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.